The modern world. In the past, society was so poor that the aristocracy had to be hereditary in order to maintain its economic wealth. This is no longer the case due to the massive productivity increases of the relatively free market. Now, a successful politician can easily gather enough wealth to last several generations, or forever if handled wisely, in just a few terms. This has allowed for the development of the illusion that the taxed livestock control something we call democracy. Because we can steal so much wealth in such a short amount of time, the ruling classes have agreed to rotate in and out of power in order to maintain the illusion that there is no ruling class. This rotation is essential to maintaining the optimism of the livestock by giving them the belief, almost always false, that they too can join the ruling class. This means that the ruling class is no longer directly exclusive, but rather somewhat permeable, at least at the fringes. The modern democratic system has the advantage of transferring literally trillions of dollars from the workers to the rulers, a plunder unprecedented in human history. But the logic of our system is inherently self-destructive, which is why it is important for you, as a new political leader, to make sure that you extract as much money as possible before the whole house of cards comes crashing down. We will tell you how to do this later. The democratic system only really came into its own with the abandonment of the gold standard and the introduction of merely paper currency. Governments in the 19th century and before were limited in the amount they could bribe supporters and dependents by the amount of gold they had in their vaults. Gold cannot be created by printing presses, and so abandoning the gold standard, the capacity for citizens to redeem paper money for gold, allowed the printing presses of government bribery to work overtime, creating a good deal of the so-called wealth of the post-Second World War period. Democratic governments, like all governments, are all about the forced transfer of wealth from the productive to the unproductive. When the creation of money was limited by actual gold, it was more or less a zero-sum game. When you stole from one group to give to another, always taking your cut, it was a direct reduction and increase of wealth in the present, which was not only highly evident, but also gave the group being stolen from a good deal of incentive to fight the theft. But with the introduction of fiat currency, this all changed. The unimaginative ascribed this to the advent of Keynesianism, but the truth is that fiat currencies predated Keynesianism, and Keynesianism was merely the intellectual cover for the greatest intergenerational theft in history. When governments can print their own money, politicians can sell future generations off to bribe supporters in the present, and shaft the poor at the same time. If the government adds 5% to the currency in circulation, those closest to the government get to spend that money first, at the prior valuation before inflation hits. And then, as the additional money spreads through the economy, the price of everything rises, since you have more money relative to goods than you had before. And those at the bottom and the outskirts of the economy, generally the poor and those on fixed incomes, get hit the hardest. Thus, printing money serves two major purposes. First, it gives free cash to politicians to bribe their supporters. Second, it creates and exacerbates poverty on the outskirts of the economy, thus giving an excuse for politicians to raise taxes, create more government programs, and thus more supporters and dependents, and print more money, thus closing the circle. That's good. Fiat currency also allows for luxurious indulgences in social engineering. You can create wars on everything, since war is the health of the state, just as the state is the health of war. Drugs, poverty, prostitution, gambling, illiteracy, sickness, whatever. This creates more and more people dependent on state payouts and scares everyone through terrifying attacks on ordinary human vices. It also changes the kinds of people who want to become cops. But again, more on that later. Unfortunately, the relationship between increases in the money supply and inflation has been too well established and understood to be of much use anymore. Capital markets are always on the lookout for the overprinting of money and punish governments by increasing the price of their bonds or downgrading their credit ratings. Well, this is just another reason why we are approaching the end of the current cycle of human ownership. The second trick that governments can use to bribe those around them is to refrain from pumping money directly into the economy, but rather to create imaginary money and use it to buy their own government bonds. All this does is push the liability of the repayment of bonds, both interest and principal, into the future. It's a mere accounting trick, like just about everything else the government does, but fools more than enough people to keep the game going just a little bit longer. Democracy and bribery. Oh, but I repeat myself. Every politician must promise, say, $3 in benefits for every dollar taken in taxes. This is utterly impossible, of course, since the government has no money of its own and is ridiculously inefficient at everything it tries. So it is only through borrowing or printing money that politicians are able to bribe voters into imagining that the government produces wealth. The introduction of fiat currency in the modern banking system, protected by government-controlled cartels, as well as the legal shield called the corporation, has been a godsend to modern politicians, since it allows the costs of present-day bribery to be pushed off decades or even generations into the future. This has been a complete no-brainer for everyone involved. Free bribe money paid for by strangers who haven't even been born yet is a temptation too lucrative and consequence-free to even imagine resisting. Technically, democracy is a money-drug addiction that wages war on drugs far less addictive and destructive. This is the end. Doo-doo-doo.